Good morning, everyone. My name is Karina Coburn, and I am the country manager of the Inter-American Development Bank in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to start by saying that today is actually a holiday in TNT, so happy Corpus Christi to those who celebrate. And Denise, my fellow panelists, and I are actually working on the public holiday, so I think we need kudos for that. Nevertheless, I would say that we're very happy to be here with you for what is sure to be a very useful and informative discussion. So this panel is going to be discussing big data, which is a buzzword that most of us have been hearing a lot about. But what exactly does the term big data mean for the development challenges facing us in the Caribbean? My understanding is that big data refers to large, complex data sets which can be difficult to process and which contain greater variety, arrive in increasing volumes, and with more velocity than traditional data, the so-called 3 V's concept of big data. The idea is that if we can get a handle on big data and properly collect, analyze, and distribute it, then we can improve our understanding of human behavior and develop sound evidence-based policy to drive economic growth and development. But of course, as with many things, this is easier said than done. That is why today we have assembled a group of distinguished panelists who will share with us their practical experience leveraging data in specific projects across Latin America and the Caribbean. We'll start by listening to presentations from IDB Housing and Urban Development Specialist Mauricio Busquela, Marine Biologist Ramon Roach, and IDB Water and Sanitation Specialist Dr. Mauro Nalesso. This will be followed by observations and a short commentary from Denise White, who is the Deputy National Chief Digital Officer from the Ministry of Digital Transformation in Trinidad and Tobago. And after that, we hope that we'll be able to open for questions. So I think we can get started. Mauricio, I think you can go ahead and bring up your presentation while I introduce you.
Okay.
Mauricio joined the IDB in 2008, and since then has been at the forefront of several multi-sectorial projects in more than 18 countries, leveraging innovative technologies for economic and social development. Since 2011, Mauricio has led various smart city projects which aim at deploying and enabling smart cities across Latin America and the Caribbean. Mauricio, if you're ready to go, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Karina. Good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to address something related to smart cities, starting with urban challenges, smart cities, big data, and share some knowledge and some examples with you. Well, we've been seeing a growth in the people in the cities, a big increase in urbanization or rapid growth in the cities, but also we've seen a lot of changes or challenges of people who are moving to the cities because we had little planning in the cities, and we can experience this in the last 50 years, for example, but many people moved to the cities and they didn't find the appropriate services or the appropriate conditions to be very successful there in terms of having a quality of life. For example, we can mention a few challenges that we've seen in the cities in Latin America and Caribbean. We know that in Latin America, the average urbanization is around 80%. In the Caribbean, we vary from 82% in Bahamas and going maybe the 10% in the Trinidad and Tobago. So we've seen like some challenges like urban development, city security, mobility, the response to emergency, disasters management, water and sanitation, energy, city participation, public services. And now in the last 2 years, we've seen some challenges related to tourism, to also employment and things like that. So within these scenarios of very many challenges we've been experiencing in our cities, in our countries, we cannot afford to have the traditional management to make our cities successful. We need to adopt a new model of management, migrating our cities to a smart city model. So if you look about smart cities, what we're talking is mostly to having the leverage of technology, people, and process to manage the city in a more effective and efficient way. We want to have our cities managed in a very holistic way. That means getting all the areas together and having interrelations about different things. For example, when you look about security and safety, we want also to understand about the potential of lighting related to security. When you're talking about the environment, we want to understand about pollution, contamination, the health emergencies, for example, of people who are with respiratory disease, for example. We're talking about traffic, we're talking about congestion as well, and emergencies. So when we're talking about smart cities, we want to understand the city for a holistic, integrated way. So what are the pillars that compose the smart cities? So we have four major pillars, starting with connectivity, broadband connectivity. We are talking here for broadband connectivity. We're talking maybe inter-countries fiber optics or connections. We're talking about Wi-Fi. We're talking about cell phone connectivity. So that's the pillar number one. In the pillar number two, we are talking about connected devices. And this connected device could be the cameras, surveillance cameras, could be sensors, like sensors for climate, for rain, for sound, for temperature, or maybe our cell phones that are pretty much interesting sensors. They are able to track a lot of things. And maybe the GPS is in the buses, in the taxis, in the cars. The third pillar has to do with smart data-driven center. So it's the center who's able to connect to all these devices and get the data and make a really good analysis of the data to make real-time decisions and respond to maybe emergency, but also to collect this data and analyze this data to make the big proposals for policy changes or really defining some decisions for the long term. The fourth pillar is the citizen communication, citizen participation. We know that all citizens right now, they want to be more participatory in a democratic society. They want to be also providing their inputs for the management, for the city councils, in the same way that the city wants to communicate with the citizens as well. So we use these four pillars as the foundation of a smart city. And without this foundation that I mentioned, all this view related to having the city in a very maybe multi-sector way, we see the smart cities as well of the digital transformation. That's maybe last few years we talk about digital transformation as well. These are generating tons and tons of data. We call them big data. But the question is, what is the real value of the big data? Many will say, oh, big data is the new petroleum or the oil of the 21st century. Is it really? Well, the way we know is that the real value of data is the capacity to use the data and offer new information. That means big data, I would say, sorry for the word, but it's a really garbage if you're not able to use this data, to analyze the data and make decisions, either the short term or long term, and also design public policies that will improve the life of the people. So that's the real value of big data. So we did at IDB, we did create a new methodology that allowed us to evaluate the maturity level of smart cities, or cities, the capacity or the maturity level of cities to implement smart city projects. We did that with the support of Deloitte. And one thing that brought was in 10 cities, we did it. And one thing that came out of this study or this technical operation was that average maturity level of these 10 cities was 2.24 out of 5, less than the average. And that brought them to the intentional level of maturity. But one point really stood out, was the data potential of 2.38, that's also in the rate of intentional. What that means is that even though the cities were collecting lots of data, they were really having maybe a good level of digitalization, they still behind in taking the all data potential to make good decisions, to design public policies. And by the way, at the bottom of my presentation, you have a link to the methodology and a self-assessment tool that would allow any city to self-evaluate and see how they are doing in terms of smart city maturity. Because of that, we were motivated in doing like another maybe study or another implementation in 3 cities in Brazil, and São Luís, Recife, and Vitória. These 3 cities had similar characteristics on the cities in the Caribbean because they are coastal cities. They are, cities that are having problems related to climate change, to criminality or pollution, etc. So when we started to do these cities, we say, okay, let's see how we can really proactively work with these cities so they can leverage the data and make better decisions. So we started understanding what are the big challenges they are having. So they showed us the challenges that were just accessibility for healthcare or maybe mobility and so on. They have challenges related to housing, informal settlements, sanitation, property tax debt, disaster risk management. So we're still executing this technical operation. After we define these challenges, we're going to do some proof of concept pilots and then capacity building and dissemination. So we're going to share all the results with all the community or maybe all the partners at the IDB community in the 26 countries. And I have the project link also in the bottom right of my slides. So one thing that we did also was doing some examples of demos. By the way, this was done by a friend of us, a consultant from a university in Lima, Peru. And I say, hey, how can we learn a little more about the accessibility to healthcare in travel times from these 3 cities? So he used just public data from, OpenStreetMap or Facebook population density and so on. And he plotted these 3 charts to me. This chart shows, for example, and this chart really combine, population and also healthcare facility, and I just like consolidate all the 3 of them. But what they are really showing here, let's say Port Spain, in this part here, let's say that is showing that people who are willing to go to a health facility might take between 90 to 120 minutes. That's maybe 1 hour and a half and 2 hours. People in the yellow area here, it's about 10, 15 minutes in transit time from the health facilities. And if you see about Kingston, there's pretty much coverage in the center of the city. And Barbados, you can see the difference coverage, maybe in southwest of the country, or maybe in the south, where you have some facilities and some maybe accessibility. But one thing that we did here, and he did that in maybe 2 hours, plotting some existing tools that we have at the IDB, and also a tool called UrbanPy. And it was really pretty easy for that. And this is just an example. For sure, depending on the questions we have, depending on the thing we want to promote or to want to analyze, maybe some more complexity things, but everything could be possible in terms of analyzing the data. So we say, what are maybe the 7 steps to leverage big data in order to really take the best advantage of data in the cities? So we have these 7 things here. One would be the urban challenges. What we need to understand and agree, what are the major challenges they are facing in the city, in the country, in the region? After defining the challenges, we need to say, what are the key questions I want to answer? I want to say, for example, how I reduce the transit time from people in the outskirts of the city to maybe their work downtown, or how much do I get better services, social services for the population that's also underserved? So, and deciding the key questions is really important. The third step, we need to understand what are the data that we have available that will allow us to understand or answer these questions. For sure, we have census data, we have the data from different sources of the government, we have external data and so on. So analyzing this data is important from the format, for the availability. We need to be very cautious in terms of the privacy and also security. So we need to follow all these rules and regulation. After the diagnosis, we want to build a proof of concept, like the ones I showed you, for example, in these 3 cities, and show that this could be done, could be possible, and we have really visual representation that allows us to get some insights and some understanding about the data. After that, we design a data strategy. We are very careful in terms of regulation, what we can do, we cannot do. And then we do the capacity building dissemination, and then we go to the implementation, having like data offices. So we saw that it's very feasible. We can do it in many cities and so on, but it's very important that we follow these steps. As a reference, I'm putting here like 3 publications. One is for smart cities. The other would be for big data for sustainable urban development. It's a project we developed with Fundação Getúlio Vargas from Brazil, where we talk about also how we were able to work with these cities, 5 cities. And then the last one is cybersecurity guide for smart cities. That's really, we saw that when we're talking about data, it's very important that we also aware about the impact and the vulnerabilities of governments they have in terms of hackers and also attackers. So this is a very new publication. The links, you have it here in the bottom. And I hope those will be very useful for you in your projects. So in that situation, we are sure that, using data tools and people, we can move from a traditional management and going for a data-driven smart region. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll be ready for questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mauricio. And I would say that it's really interesting to see the way that cities are evolving. And I guess at the end of the day, the idea is that this will make a difference and improve the quality of life for residents of these cities. Let me ask that anyone who is listening use the Q&A feature to drop any questions for the panelists. We're going to try to reserve some time at the end to get back to those questions. And let me introduce Ramon while he brings up his presentation. Ramon Roach is a trained marine biologist who started his career at the Coastal Zone Management Unit in Barbados, where he became the resident GIS expert. Ramon was also the project coordinator for the Caribbean Marine Atlas project and was the Coastal Information Systems Manager for the IDB-funded Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program, which is the project he's going to talk a little bit about today. Currently, Ramon is the head of the newly created Data Management section of the Barbados Coastal Zone Management Unit. Over to you, Ramon.
Thank you very much, Karina. Morning all, and thank you for having me at this conference. Yeah, so as Karina was saying, I'm just going to give a quick overview. National Coastal Risk Information and Planning Platform, NCRIP, that was developed for Barbados under an IDB program. So I'm just going to go through the origin of the NCRIP. So the NCRIP is an output of the Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Program. And this was a program, as I was saying, funded by the IDB for risk characterization and risk mainstreaming in Barbados. So the overall budget for this program was US $42 million, but it included, so aside from the NCRIP, there was also coastal construction, capacity building. There were a number of other activities for that $42 million budget. So the goal of the CRM is to build resilience to coastal risks in Barbados, including those associated with coastal hazards, natural disasters, and climate change. And coming out of that, the objective is really to build capacity integrated coastal zone management by incorporating disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation within our development and operations. So in terms of the foundation of the NCRIP as a system relies on the data that it contains. And this data had to come from somewhere. So what we did is we conducted a number of baseline studies on coastal and oceanographic processes in Barbados in order to update our understanding of our environment. So we had studies looking at nearshore waves and current regimes. We did a LiDAR 3D survey of the entire island and part of the seabed. We looked at shoreline change in terms of shore position over time. We looked at pollutant dispersion modeling and water quality analysis. We looked at cliff stability. We also looked at sediment transport patterns as well. So just focusing on one of those activities, the 3D topographic surveys, the LiDAR surveys, we conducted island-wide, high-resolution aerophotography and topography mapping. We also extracted from that land use classifications, marine benthic habitat classification, as well as building footprint prediction. And we also had information on building density around the island. So just to give you an example of the quality of this data, so here's an aerial photograph of one of the famous hotels in Barbados, the Hilton Hotel, which is on the southwest coast of the island. So from the aerial photograph, and we have overlain the three-dimensional point cloud, showing the density of the points, and they're categorized according to the type of return it is. So if it's seabed, it's blue. If it's the actual ground, it's a more dark red color, and if it is rooftop, it's a bright red color, and if it's green, it's identified as vegetation. So of course, since it's a three-dimensional point cloud, you can rotate it and you can see the actual representation in a side-on view of the 3D topography or the density of the points. And here is just zoomed in on that same shot, just showing the density of the points along the Hilton's roof. So you can really see it's a very high density data set. And this information is what we use for a lot of our hazard modeling, such as storm surge, rainfall-induced flooding, landslides, etc. So in terms of the development of the NCRIP itself, so the NCRIP is really a software system for risk identification and risk mainstreaming. So the cost of this activity within the CRMP was about $2.9 million US. And the goal was to develop a shared software platform to inform design and hazard resilient coastal development in Barbados. We are now using it for more than just that purpose. We're using it for island-wide risk assessment, but initially it was developed for this purpose. So really the objectives of the NCRIP were to perform probabilistic assessment on anthropogenic hazards, including the effects of climate change, for built asset risk classification. So this is about buildings and structures and those types of assets within our terrestrial environment. We are looking to expand this into other types of assets, but that was the focus of the original NCRIP. And by probabilistic assessment, I just mean that we're not only looking at historical hazard information, we are really using historical hazard information to model future storms or future types of events over a long time period to get a better understanding of not only what kind of challenges faced in the past, but what kind of hazards we might face in the future, especially those that are exacerbated by climate change. So following that probabilistic assessment of the natural and anthropogenic hazards, we then developed the multi-user risk assessment software platform itself. So the first stage of that was the comprehensive risk evaluation. So we use the information, nearshore sediment transport, those types of studies, and we use that information to do extreme value analysis on a range of hazards, including storm winds, earthquakes, storm surge, rainfall-induced flooding, landslides and slope instability, particularly in an area on the east coast of Barbados called the Scotland District. We looked at coastal erosion, tsunamis, as well as oil spills. Following that hazard assessment, we then did a vulnerability assessment to look at the exposure of the assets to these particular types of hazards. Using that hazard and vulnerability information, we then performed the risk assessment, and then we obtained a number of hazard, vulnerability, and risk maps, which I'll show you some examples of now. So this is an example of the hazard maps that was produced for the study. This is a flood hazard map from rainfall-induced flooding. So you can see a number of, so the gray polygons are buildings, and you can see in this particular area of part of our main city, Bridgetown, that there are a number of buildings that are exposed to flooding, and the different colors of the flood of the flood polygons, which are in blue, indicate different return periods. So a light blue is a 1 in 10-year storm, a darker blue is a 1 in 25, darker than that 1 in 20, 1 in 50, and then 1 in 100. So you can see based on the different expected severities of storms, the different extents of the expected flooding, as well as the different flood depths as well. Another example of a hazard map we produced, this is for storm surge. This is an area of Speightstown to the northwest portion of the island. And you can see again, the inundation extent expected from storm surge from different return periods, and also an indication of which buildings are directly exposed to wave action, which is the hatched green area. Another example of a hazard map is for slope stability in the area of the district on the east coast of the island. So this area is particularly prone to land slippage. So part of the analysis, we looked at based on information about the slope angle and the type of material, what are the areas that are exposed to a particularly higher degree of risk of land slippage based on the angle of the slope and the expected rainfall events. So we're able to very much identify not only which areas are potentially going to be impacted, but also the degree to which they could potentially be impacted by different rainfall events which trigger landslides. So using the hazard maps that were produced, we then developed vulnerability maps. So this is an example of a vulnerability map, again in the area of Speightstown. So we were able to identify different sectors of our built environment. So be it tourism or commercial structures, residential structures, different land use types. And then based on those different land use types, we can classify the extent of vulnerability or comparative vulnerability between those different types of sectors with different types of hazards. So this is just looking at the water-based hazards, so tsunamis, rainfall-induced flooding, and storm surge, and looking at the relative extent of vulnerability between the different sectors. So using the hazard information and the vulnerability information, we're then able to develop risk maps. So this is an example of a risk map in the area of St. Philip on the east coast of Barbados. And we are able to look at, again, all the hazards. We divided the entire island up into 100 meter by 100 meter grid cells, and then extracted the risk information for each grid cell. And then so you're able to identify and compare which areas have relatively higher risk than other areas for the different hazards. And we can also do it by sector. So this is a risk map for storm winds at the 100-year return period event, looking at residential buildings. And you can see there are some areas which have a higher risk in terms of expected damage versus other areas. And then this is the same area, but looking at the risk with relation to commercial buildings. So you can see we can analyze this information sector by sector and make decisions based on that information. So that information that was determined under the comprehensive risk assessment was then incorporated within the NCRIP software system itself. So the system is web-based, multi-user risk evaluation communication tool for risk-based decision-making by the CZMU and our strategic partners. And for CZMU itself, it's also electronic development application management system. So the features of the NCRIP, so in the system evaluates risk in a quantitative manner by revealing the estimated cost of repair or replacement of an asset due to a hazard event of a given severity or return period, impacting that. And the information is driven, or analysis is driven by the results of the probabilistic assessments that were conducted under the earlier part of the study. Damage estimates are based on the hazard severity combined with the asset vulnerability, its exposure to which is the exposure of the asset to the hazard as well as its susceptibility. So how easily is it to be damaged by that particular hazard? And that information is what drives the damage estimates. So what the NCRIP does not do at this current time, it does not do real-time disaster management. It can't model hazards on the fly. So if there's an approaching storm, it does not give you risk information based specifically on that one storm or modeled based on the return periods that were analyzed earlier. So no outside return periods outside of those specific return periods. And the risk calculations make certain assumptions on construction materials and types of buildings, et cetera, from the 2010 census. So just an example of the interface itself. So how you would determine risk or analyze risk in a particular area. So if we're looking at rainfall-induced flooding, this is an area of Old Town. You select an area where you want to do your analysis. The system returns information on all the built assets within that area. So their overall housing value, the overall value based on their parcel value. And if you look at each particular asset, it will tell you what it's exposed to in terms of different hazards. You get the information on damage that area, so amalgamated for that area for the different return periods for the different types of hazards. And you can also look at that information graphically to determine or more easily assess, which are the priority hazards to be addressed within this particular area. So this area of Old Town is very much a touristic area. So commercial buildings, catering to tourism, and it can be very different to a commercial area, which is this next example. So this is in the area of the Port of Bridgetown, looking at commercial buildings. So again, you get the information on the amalgamated risk levels in terms of damage. But you see, it can have a much different identification of what the priority hazards are. So in this case, it's very much wind, which is the yellow color, is much higher, is expected to be a much more significant risk factor than, say, flooding in this area. So how we're applying the NCRIP within Government of Barbados now. So we're trying to mainstream the information or policy directives that are contained within our recently updated Integrated Coastal Zone Management Plan. So how do we make this plan work in practice? Well, we're using information from the NCRIP to drive our decision-making when we're analyzing development that's occurring in the coastline. We're hoping that this information can be used to improve national budgeting and asset accounting. So, how much money is allocated to mitigation programs? You can do cost benefit analysis. If you're protecting a certain amount of value of assets, the structure that you are going to construct, you can do a cost benefit analysis of the benefits. And you can also value protective structures. So if you know that a particular breakwater is protecting, $50 million worth of property, that gives you a better understanding what the value of that structure is. The platform is also being used to enhance resilience in private sector infrastructure investment. So by this information being used in the planning process, we can better guide private sector in infrastructure investment, make sure that it's resilient to hazards. And in the future, we have easier access to climate financing and grant funding because we have a quantitative base of information on what the benefits from different interventions would be. And it also allows us to identify the key assets related to development of a sustainable blue economy. So how we're maintaining this system going forward. So as Karina would have mentioned, we recently created a permanent data management section within our agency, the Coastal Management Unit. We're responsible for the maintenance and development of the NCRIP, as well as provision of the information to our strategic partners. We're currently doing updated higher resolution flood modeling to input into the platform to get a better understanding of exactly where the hazards will occur from different return periods. We are trying to work with our strategic partners to get as up-to-date information as possible on the parcel valuation information collected by our strategic partners, and that will give us a better idea of what the current risk is expected from different return periods. And we're trying to get more specific building information from our partners as well, so we can better model risk. So we're also hoping to integrate this system with the Town and Country Planning's e-planning platform, which is the system that they use to manage development applications. We're trying to get higher resolution demographic information, and we're trying to add additional asset types such as environmental assets like reefs and beaches. So in terms of the full development timeline for the NCRIP itself, so the baseline studies on coastal processes, that was 4 years. The comprehensive hazard risk assessment, and then the development of the NCRIP software system itself, that was another 5 years. We developed a strategic implementation plan for how to mainstream the encrypt within government of Barbados, and we got cabinet approval for the use of that strategic implementation plan and the use of the encrypt by the CZMU itself, and that was another 2 years. And we recently received cabinet approval for the use of the encrypt nationally, and that was another 1 year. So thank you very much for that quick description of the encrypt and where we are, and I look forward to questions during the Q&A section. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramon. I must say this is a particularly powerful platform, and I see that you have already begun thinking about the linkages between encrypt and other elements of the policy framework in Barbados. So it will be interesting to see how that continues to play out. Hopefully we can begin looking at replication to other countries in the Caribbean as well. Thanks a lot, Ramon. Since this is a hybrid event, I didn't mention that those in the room should be able to ask questions at the end. I understand there are some mics there that you would be able to use. And for those who are connected online, as I mentioned, please drop your questions for the panelists in the Q&A tab. At this point, we're going to turn to Mauro now for his presentation. So you can go ahead and bring that up, Mauro. Let me introduce Dr. Mauro Nalesso, who is a civil engineer by training. He holds a doctorate in hydraulic and hydrological numerical modeling. Mauro is an expert in the field of water resources management, hydraulic projects, hydrodynamics, and field and laboratory measurements. Since 2016, he has been the coordinator of the HydroBid Support Center for Latin America and the Caribbean within the IDB, with presence in 21 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is a program that he created. So please tell us all about it, Mauro. You're on mute.
There you go. Yeah.
So we didn't hear anything you said.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, no, thank you, Karina, for the introduction. Yeah, and then I figured it out that I probably were on mute, and I was. So thank you for the invitations, and thank you for the opportunity to talk on this event. What I'm going to present to you briefly, this time I have available, is one of the initiative on how from the Inter-American Development Bank we use data to produce information in order to support development, sustainable development in countries. And this is what we do in the HydroBid Support Center. The HydroBid Support Center, just to give you a brief introduction, was created in 2016 to technically strengthen water resource management in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also support planning related to water resources, but preparation and preparedness and mitigation of extreme events, adaptation plans for climate change, but also to support the preparation and execution of investment programs in order to guarantee the sustainability and resilience of this program. And everything it's depending on data. No? So we are in 21 of 26 IDB member countries. We have done technology transfer most in those countries. This year we're going to be in 2 more countries, and we have supported a lot of agencies. We're supporting a lot of agencies, helping them to transform data into information and information into action. No, that's what basically we do. We do this with technology transfer, but we also do supporting projects that goes on several topics on the decision making based on science. We have also support since 2018. We have support more than 20 investment loans and investment programs of the bank for almost $2,000 million. This means that we use our capacities and our models to verify that the investments are resilient, are gonna make the function for where they are being designed, and this is very important. And of course, we are working in our technology transfer that we are doing in the region. We are working with several universities of the region and also in Spain. And this is an initiative that is already being replicated in Asia, in Africa, and also in the US. So this is very important, and here we are going to understand the importance of data and the importance of how we use data. That is the basic thing on this. When we talk about climate, when we have, for example, this specific case was built for Chile, but you know the numbers are more or less the same for all the region. When we thought about what's the main issue on why we have water scarcity in our country, you know, what specific water scarcity. So, well, now it's very easy to say, well, it's climate change, or it's water availability. No, but the truth is that when we analyze what happened in the countries of the regions, this specific number is for Chile. And when this was done in Chile, Chile had a 10-year mega drought. So take that in account, no, for this number. So when we realize what's the main issue that creates problems related to water scarcity, and when we analyze this, water availability, it's only in well, this is what the water contamination knows. Of course, this is water decreases in supply in this case. Sorry, it's on the 4th place in Chile. Okay, that's include climate change. So it's the 4th. So there is a other things that are have more impact, but the thing that have most impact of all and is problems on governance and management. That is almost half of the issue. Okay, and then of course the second place, that is the second place all around the world, is the increase on demand. Okay, so but the first place, the most important issue, and this is similar in every single country of the region, is problem on management and governance. And it's not because there is no government or not management, but it's because there is no, they are not using information to make consistent and good decisions. Sometimes because they lack of data, but most of the time because they don't know how to transfer that data and create information, and how this information goes into plans, policies, and regulations. So this is a big issue of the region, but we are very lucky because we can solve this very fast, and it doesn't have the impact. Imagine if water decreases in the supply were the 44%, then there is no more we can do. So we are in a huge problem. So the good thing is that we can solve that 44%, and we can change how the region, the impact of water resources in the region. So how we do is from the Hydrobit Support Center, where we start from the foundation. So we start supporting the creation of data. Okay, some of the countries have a big issue on this. Other countries don't have this issue. For example, Brazil has a lot of data, but they don't actually they are not really efficient on how to use data to transfer information to solve issues on water resources. So even in Brazil, we have issues with droughts and floods and all this type of thing. So data is the base. So it's the base. We need to produce data, but data is creating baselines. Is creating history. So the capability to produce planning is very limited. To produce planning, we need also to know a little bit, expand that little bit to the future. So that means that we need to create information based on that data. Because remember also that one important thing in the region is that governments never paid attention on the importance of this. So we don't have a lot of data. I'm talking about hydroclimatic data. Okay, so that is important for these issues. So this creates a lot of important issues that don't allow us to use data for planning, because we have very short periods. No, we have 50 years or 60 years. That's not enough for very important things that we can do with data. So that means that if we want to plan, if we want to do something usual, we need to produce information. Here's what the models enter. Okay, but the information is not enough unless it's available for the people in a way that they can understand what is happening and it can be used to make decisions. So this means that you need to create information system, decision support system, early warning system, where this data is transformed in information and is transformed in actions. And then once you create that type of system that is an effective use of information, then you can go to the governance. Then you can use that to efficiently using that knowledge and to produce policies, to produce plans, to produce preparation, and to design infrastructure. So this is the road that we are following with the Hydrobit Support Center, and this is how we are supporting the country. So we are 3 models. 2 models are for water, so for water resources planning. Okay, this is a watershed level. It's a offer demand model, very specific, where you can plan the use of every type of demands inside of a watershed and understand what is happening and what may happen in the future if population growth, with climate change, with a possible drought in 6 months, and how all your system works, how your reservoir works, your potabilization plants, your distribution systems. What happens if I reduce uncontabilized water, for example, in a system? And this helps you to understand how to plan your investment in the long period. And then we have another model that is for territory planning, that is the Hydrobit flood, that we use for floods. It's what we're going to present because it's what we did in Trinidad very specifically, for example, that we use for flood, to analyze flood, to analyze what type of solution we can have for flood, but also how we can build better infrastructure with the information we are obtaining for that. And also both models give you also the economic analysis of those events. So for example, how we use data to produce information that is producing better planning and better water resource management. We have this big project for the Magdalena Cauca, for example, where we are having information on every single of those watersheds on water and demand, and we are supporting the water resource management plan for the Magdalena Cauca, which is half of the country of Colombia, and is one of the most important watershed economically speaking. So we produce indicators that help to understand how the watershed is behaving and how the impacts of the action that is in this area are producing the management of the water resources in all the sectors. We are also helping a water utility like Sedapal. This is in Lima. We are producing a system where they can control all their funds, the water, where the water comes, and also the nodes of demand. And they can have a view of the short, medium, and long-term forecast to understand how can they deal with what is going to happen in the next drought season, in the next dry season of Peru, or what can happen in 10 years, or what happens if I expand the city. So we are building this very interesting decision support system that now is going to be expanded to all the country. And we are also going to implement a similar system for the entire Bolivia, that has requested for that. So you can imagine how the amount of data that we use to produce this information. But as we heard, it's not, the data is important only if you produce information that help you to make decisions. That's the really importance of data. That if you only have data, you will still having problems if you don't do this. That is what is happening in the country. For example, our other model, I'm going to expand a little bit, is Hydrobit flood. This is an hydrodynamic model that use a lot of information come from satellites and information coming from also local station to produce very detailed information. I'm talking about centimeters, and I'm talking about seconds. It's a very detailed information that can help you to analyze riverine, fluvial, or coastal floods, to obtain hazard risk and vulnerability maps, but also design. With this, you can design infrastructure, not only for flood mitigation, but what happened with the infrastructure that is located in rivers or in coastal zone that can be flooded. That is what we do in Trinidad, and I'm going to show you now. But you can also evaluate erosion deposition, which is also important for infrastructure. It's also important for events, and also design drainage system. So this is a system that where you can actually put rainfall, and the rainfall will flow through your streets and will enter to your drainage system. So you can, it's a model that will help you to design your drainage systems with really detail. If you do that separately, it's not going to work. That is how we do it 20 years ago, and it creates several issues on how the drainage systems were designed. And now we can actually design the system as is in the street and test how it works. And of course, we have very other applications also for water quality. That is very important also, and for bridge and pier. So what we did in Trinidad and Tobago was helping the transport division of our sector in a road infrastructure flood risk assessment. This was very interesting. It has different level because as you're going to see. And the basic line of this was that the lack of adequate information on rain intensity, risk assessment, flood hazard, reduced the ability of properly define and manage appropriate stormwater runoff, drainage, and also infrastructure. So this is something that lead this program. So the first phase used more generic data to understand with the Ministry of Transport and the drainage agency for determine the prioritization of the areas. Okay, they have prioritized areas where they think the flood are more create more vulnerability. After that, we develop with information of data, with all the data of hydroclimatic stations in Trinidad, but also those global systems that we have from radar, create all the hydrological models that includes also climate change. And then we use the hydrobid flood modeling to understand the vulnerabilities. Then we do a technology transfer to Trinidad, and now they are able to use the model to design and define the interventions that are going to be used to reduce the impact of flood on bridges, or also reduce the impact of bridges on floods, because in urban areas, both things can happen. A flood can make you lose a bridge, but also a bridge can produce flood in areas upstream of that infrastructure. So basically, what type of data we use? A lot of data is needed to do this. All this data is available. All these countries have this amount of this type of data. Of course, local data is something we are supporting. We are working with the World Meteorological Organization to do specific analysis on countries to produce roadmaps on how those countries can improve in a sustainable way how they can work with produce hydroclimatic data needed for this type of analysis or all the other type of also water resource analysis. So with that, a very detailed hydrologic analysis was done in different watersheds in Trinidad. And after that, we need other type of data that today is very available. Some of these data that can be used for this are free. Other data can be obtained using drones that have reduced a lot the cost to do this. And this is going to become a standard also in operations of the bank that will include all the elevation of digital elevation model of the rain. So we need a lot of information, detailed information, and also infrastructure information. And with that, what we do is a very detailed model where you can input rainfall that can be input also from radars, or you can use synthetic hydrology. No, that is what we use usually to do design. No, so you calculate your hydrology and then you input directly the hydrology on the river is what we're doing here. But this type of model has everything. It has the bridges, every single bridge designing at this. So you can actually see here what's the effect. Here you can see also the effect of tides and then the flood coming from the river. And what we obtain are these type of specific maps where you see which type of roads are getting flooded. You also see here what I was talking here in this watershed. There is an issue where a bridge is causing actually a flooding, a retention of water that it's causing a flooding that then is going to the right bank and it's flooding an area. Okay, if you solve this type of problems, you can reduce the flooding also in the urban area. So what we do with this is discuss this with the agency. The agency recognize what type of suggest what type of solution they can implement, and then with the model they can actually design and retest. Okay, this is what we are doing in other projects. So we can actually analyze what type of solutions are being implemented, use all the information, creating all information necessary to the design of this infrastructure. We retest the infrastructure until it works as we expected. And then we are able to produce effective solutions for the country. So just to finish, we have a very huge community of practice with all the users of Hydrobit around the world, and now around the world, because we are also in Asia, Africa, and the United States. But we make an event every year. We hope that this event will be again in person this year, where we discuss with the countries how we can improve the way we use data to produce information to help them to solve development issues related to water resources. Okay, so this is what we are doing from the Hydrobit Support Center. This is how we use data. But I think that the most important message is region for water resources need to build better databases. We don't have enough data, but if you have data, what you need to produce is information, and this information need to be put in a way that help you to build solutions. Other way, you can have a lot of data, you can have put this data in the best way you can, and data per se is not going to solve the issues you have in your country. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Mauro. It does seem as if simulation and visualization is going to be the way to go in terms of utilizing big data efficiently and effectively. It really was interesting to see the flooding of the roads visualized like that through Hydrobit. So really interesting application and use of the tool. Okay, well, let's move along. Denise is with us today from the Ministry of Digital Transformation in Trinidad and Tobago to share a few of her thoughts on what we've been hearing so far in terms of how big data is being used. I will just give a short introduction of Denise. Denise White is the Deputy National Chief Digital Officer at the Ministry of Digital Transformation in TNT. She has worked extensively on e-government and digital transformation initiatives across the public sector in Trinidad and Tobago, including working on the implementation of the country's first national ICT plan. She is very interested in the people side of technology, and her current areas of work include ICT policy and strategy and capacity building for the government's ICT agenda. Welcome again, Denise. And of course, thanks for spending some of your holiday with us. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thanks, Karina. And, thank you for the opportunity to share and to actually be a part of this discussion on big data. When we started off working on the first national ICT plan in Trinidad and Tobago, and that was back in 2003, I don't think that we understood what data would do, all these years later. And we sit on the cusp of digital transformation, and it's really how the technology is allowing us to collect data, to use data, and to distribute information coming out of these systems. So what is being done differently? And I think that's a consistent theme throughout all of the presentations that the panelists had this morning. What is being done differently, not just because we know more, but because we have the opportunity now to know better, to analyze the data in more meaningful ways. So when we think about public policy and this enabling environment, it's always from the perspective of public value. How do we satisfy the needs of the multiple stakeholders who have multiple interests? And I think big data is allowing us to customize our policy frameworks and our policy programs so that we can have maximum impact. We're meeting people where they are, we're meeting constituents where they are. So across these presentations, what we've seen is there is value in the data, even though we may be small in terms of the territories that we are in the Caribbean. Big data means a lot, even in a small context. And when we think about what Mauricio started with these smart cities, big data in small places. So our communities, by any means, not huge. Our cities in Trinidad and Tobago are about 30 to 60,000 people. And when we think about the data needs and we're trying to make sure that data feeds into programs that are relevant, right? Because our resources are finite. And what big data in smart city does is it helps us to prioritize what programs are implemented and prioritize it, not just from a resource availability point of view, but what is the impact on the citizenry who are part of these cities, and how do they live? How are these deployments prioritized? Who makes the decisions? Who decides on the value, right? So it's about improving the quality of life. And I like that Mauricio talked about that intersection of technology, people, and process, right? So it's not just the technology, but the data is showing us where the nexuses are in each of those elements. When we listen to Ramon talk about that encrypt system in Barbados, multi-agency use, a lot of robust input. And immediately, I think about applying that to Trinidad and Tobago and hoping that when this system was developed, we looked at standards for regional interoperability. We also looked at having that system being able to use inputs from other players. So not just government-related or inputs from what has been done formally in the part of this program, but using other inputs from other players as well, and having the applicability of this to other regions, other territories. Because when we look at the cost, not just in terms of monetary cost, I think I heard the cost of the program to implement was about 2.9 million US. And some countries, this may be a lot of money. So how can we leverage the learnings? And I'd like to hear more from Ramon in terms of, what were some of the issues that they felt helped this project move along? What were some of the policy levers that were in place that helped define where this project could go, moving out of its original scope into broadening where it is now? And where too are the intersections? Because coming from Trinidad, I also know the environmental modeling is very big in the energy industry. So can we have facility of having inputs that they collect as well, the data sets that the players in the energy industry collect, and being able to integrate into systems like these to, of course, provide more robust inputs and have better outputs in terms of the modeling. And also, when we think of this encrypt solution, is there a possibility to offer this as a service to other countries in the Caribbean, who may not have the infrastructure to develop a system from ground up on their own? And, the last presenter, Moro, talked about flooding, which we know is not a unique issue or problem. We saw what's going on in Yellowstone Park right now in the US, vast amounts of flooding happening there. And it's interesting that he talked about, a large part of the problem is management and governance. And what I wanted to ask Moro was, are we looking at putting other data sets into this system, something like behavioral data, that would enable even more predictive capability for flooding incidents or adverse incidents where flooding is concerned. So for example, in Trinidad, around Christmas or other big festivals, you have a lot of cleaning going on and people getting rid of things and the indiscriminate disposal of waste is contributing to possibly the flooding situation. So is there the ability to look at those behavioral information data sets that will allow for some better predictability as to where flooding can occur, both in location and the time of year based on what is going on culturally in the country? So data must always help in making decisions, but it must be the right data, right? It must be analyzed in the right ways. And we have to understand really what are the public policy levers that we need to pull to ensure that we maximize value of that data. So that's really what I wanted to bring across. Where do we use big data in our value chain to maximize the impact of what we know?
Thanks a lot, Denise. So I think you raised some interesting questions, which allow us to invite comments from the panelists. I don't see any Q&As yet, and I guess the administrator would let us know if there are any questions in the room. But I think we can open back to the panel to have a short chat on some of these issues that Denise would have raised. So let's go back to Mauricio first to start. We talked a lot about these smart cities in Brazil. And as you know, we in the IDB are supporting a process with the Ministry of Digital Transformation and with other stakeholders like the Member of Parliament and the local government to do a smart city pilot in Trinidad and Tobago in the area of Arima. And I just wonder how practical it is for small countries like Trinidad and Tobago to embrace the smart city concept, given how expensive it probably can be. And I'd love to hear your views on that. How do we move ahead with this agenda in the Caribbean?
Thanks, Karina, and thanks, Denise, for your comments as well. So I think it's very practical to do that. I think the value, or maybe the expensive that you mentioned, depends on the value you can get from the data, right? Or the smart city, and what's the benefit that you bring to the population, to the stakeholders, so different players in the things. So we've seen different sizes of city that have implemented that, where they see the value. So I think one of the important things is that why do I need smart city? Why do I need technology? Why do I need data? So I think sometimes it's very fashionable to say, hey, I'm a smart city, I have these, I have the latest computer and so on and so on. But what's the really use of that? So when you start looking about what's the problem we're facing, and then you see, okay, the problem has several solutions. One of them might be technological, other will be people, will be process, will be other things that we need to work on. So I think small cities or small countries, they can do that. They are able to do it. Sometimes the price is not that expensive. So the pilots we're doing in Brazil, all the process is about maybe $25,000 per city to do that. So we want to show the model that what's possible. We started, as I say, what's the challenge they are facing, what are the key questions, and then starting to look at the quality of the data. Sometimes you need a data policy that comes much before the transformation of big data strategy. So I'm happy to hear about Denise. You've been working with all the ICT policies since 2003. So it seems that you have like a way to really transform the country into something that you can use that. Because one of the things we face in these three cities is the quality of data. There's a lot of data that not well formatted, not are usable. Some information is maybe in paper, there could be digital and so on. And also I want to bring also other points that even though I say it's really possible, we need to take in consideration the capacity building for the people. So I've been working with the Caribbean. You have very, very smart people in the Caribbean, and with very good, solid background, very motivated and so on. But we need to consider as well that we're talking about new technologies, new tools, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on and so on. And this requires some updates or keep training the people, and not only the technicians, but also the public policy makers, because sometimes they heard about big data and they say, okay, great, but what's the real value of these tools or these solutions to help me make better decisions, to provide better services for my population, and really to approve new changes in my legislation that could allow the country to prosper, to be better developed, and so on. So in general, I see it like it's totally possible. We need to make sure that we understand what are the challenges. We need to have the priority. And priority is something very important, because sometimes we need, if we believe big data or technology solutions or all these things we're talking today can really make big changes, we need to get the right priority to make it happen. And today is very difficult because you have priorities with poverty, employment. We have many challenges. But if this is something that brings value, and we are able to show the real value of leveraging technology, data, and so on, not forgetting about people, as I mentioned, and then I think it's something that could be very beneficial and totally possible for small countries, small cities, and the whole region in Latin America and Caribbean.
Well, I think we're going to see the opportunity to test it, because I think that more countries in the region are becoming interested in the possibilities that smart cities can offer. Mm-hmm. Just one more question, Mauricio. What kind of new data have you been seeing emerging from these smart city initiatives? Anything new or particularly interesting emerging?
Yeah. So I think, for example, today, the public like mayors and ministers, etc., they are not able to really feel the population, right? Feel what they are thinking and so on, because you talk to people on the streets and so on, but this is like maybe depends on where you go and so on. So there are new tools, for example, that will allow you to read what's being said on Twitter or in Facebook and so on. And this is very powerful, because people might say, make different comments and so on, that sometimes not so much visible if you just do something not like in a process way. So today I'll say, like Twitter, for example, there are some tools that will read the public data on Twitter with some text, and will allow you to see the sentiment of the people regarding some issues. For example, you might have like my flooding, as Mauro mentioned. Maybe people who are around the flooding, they are complaining about something. Maybe they're complaining regarding or making some comments about something that are happening, that maybe people are not able to understand these problems. In real time, this is a very powerful tool. And we used that in Rio de Janeiro during the carnival a few years ago, where people were complaining about the garbage on the streets, and really very fast, the public officers were able to understand this was a complaint of the population, and they rapidly sent the cleaning trucks to improve the thing and so on. So that's really a very powerful tool. And nowadays we're talking about mass of people, and not able to really talk to each one, but having like a common sense about the sentiment of the people. So that's one example.
Awesome. I mean, really for the political representatives to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on in their city or community. Really good. Okay, thanks a lot, Mauricio. Turning to you, Ramon. Denise mentioned building in interoperability, and she talked a little bit about what helped the project succeed. And so I wonder if you could share a little bit with us on these two issues. Is there room for this to be easily replicated elsewhere? And is that something that had been envisaged at the beginning? And what were really the critical success factors that led to Encrypt, coming to fruition?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Encrypt it's a step along the chain of a product that was started a long time ago. Barbados has been, because we're a tourism destination, a lot of our economic value is associated with the coastal area. So there's been a long chain of at the national level to one, improve our resilience to different kinds of hazards and make it so that the coastline is much more robust in the way that it can withstand different types of natural hazards, as well as to ensure that we have a better understanding of how we can basically gain more knowledge about coastal processes and how we can build better structures and make better decisions with regard to coastal zone and development within that area. So I think the NCRIP is you know, before the project really got off its feet, that because, you know, as any other kind of country in this region, you know, we are very much vulnerable to different kinds of natural hazards, and the kind of economic shocks that countries can sustain can really set countries back, you know, several years, if not decades. So we really wanted to have a better understanding of how well are we covered in terms of recovery from these kinds of events? Do we have sufficient risk insurance or catastrophe insurance or catastrophe bond coverage? Do we have enough money in the budget to do certain kinds of rehabilitation and reconstruction work? So I think, you know, so this tool, by giving us that a better understanding of what those information needs are, and, you know, providing inputs to those information needs, was really one of the key factors which allowed it to kind of come to fruition. In terms of interoperability, so the system is quite robust in how it manages information and data, so it can take in, you know, once the information is formatted in relatively standard ways, it can take it in and process it and provide information from it. So it can use, it was built purposely with that in mind. It can be modified to take real-time data, all that kind of stuff. So it's really about, you know, what information do you have? How much information can you put into it? What systems do you have in place to make sure this information is high quality? And of course, it's, you know, over time you can improve the resolution of the hazard models that you use to run the system, and the risk information and building information, etc. So it really is a fairly robust system. But I would say that in terms of, you know, building out the system or having a system in other countries, one, I think people should, you know, be very well aware of what types of systems are currently available. So the, you know, the development of the NCRIP started in 2016. It was planned way before that. But since then, there are more open source and relatively easily available tools that can do similar things or can be used, modified in similar ways to provide similar kinds of information. And what we have found over the course of when we've been, you know, doing the NCRIP and trying to get it integrated within government processes is that you really cannot underestimate or leave out the part where you are going to your stakeholders and asking them precisely what kind of information do you need and in what form. Because often, you know, technical people, the kind of technical information is very key to what we use for a lot of our decision making from a more technical standpoint. But at, you know, certain levels, Ministry of Finance, politicians and whatnot, they very much want information that they can act upon to make decisions, you know, very quickly. And as Mauricio and Mauro are saying, it's very much about how do you change this data into information. So is it maps? Is it, you know, statistical information? Is it real-time estimates on how many houses are going to be impacted from an approaching storm? It's really that kind of information which will allow your project to be sustainable. So you very much have to focus on, you know, who are my stakeholders? What information do they need? How can I tweak the system so that it produces this information in an easily accessible and usable way? So that's what I would say about that kind of thing.
Thanks a lot, Ramon. So I think, you know, the path may be different, but I think the experience that Barbados has had developing this system is going to be invaluable to others who may be starting the journey. So thanks for that. I know that this panel is standing between the participants and lunch, so we're not going to take too much more of your time. I just have a couple more questions and then we could close. For Mauro, I know that Denise raised something really interesting about behavioral information and pulling that into the data sets of Hyderabad. And that to me is certainly a critical element to understanding what's going on. You know, how human behavior is actually impacting some of these issues, because we know that's a big part of climate change and the challenges associated. But also, you know, what's the capacity of Hyderabad to accommodate increasing data sets increasing in size? You know, it looks like it's a pretty rigorous platform, but does it have the capacity to do these other things that we're raising right now?
Well, basically, these systems work better when you have more data. No, so it works very well to accommodate all type of data sets. Specifically for Hyderabad, more than for Hyderabad flood, we are working with the countries to improve the database that we have for the entire region. So every time that new information is created, we use that information to include in our database so we can have better results. No, we can create better information if the data is better. We are also receiving every year more and better and more detailed also satellite information that can be used for this country level. So that's the idea of these systems, is to improve the capacity. And of course, we are also incrementing the type of information that we have. No, it's not only characterization, but also now water demands and how that demand goes along the year, how the variation of the demands in cities or in non-urban areas or agriculture. So every time now quality, also information of quality. So every year we are increasing the types and the amount of information that we need to produce our studies. But, yeah.
Good. All right, good news. I guess for those of us who are less familiar with big data and how it works with these systems, we tend to think that it will be overwhelming for the software to manage. But as you say, more data is better. Denise, we're going to close with you. One of the reasons I think that your insight is really useful is that the Ministry of Digital Transformation is itself new, recently formed less than a year ago, and so now you're just beginning to grapple with some of these issues. And so I wonder if there was just one challenge that you had to choose to work on in your ministry, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, the ministry is new, but the thrust of digital transformation is not a new one in government. But I think the fact that the ministry is new shows the focus that we have to place on digital transformation as part of the overall development of the country. In terms of what we focus on, I think one of the big challenges is to foster that culture, that data-centric culture throughout government and policy making. And it's not just in terms of top-down creation of policy, but really that ground up. So as we even now create our national digital transformation strategy that is focused on people, is focused on government, is focused on the economy, it's about how do we use big data to give us to keep us on the pulse of what is going on so that we can prioritize the projects and make sure that we prioritize them according to impact, potential impact. Because in a lot of instances, we pick projects because they sound nice, right? Or they've been done in other countries and it sounds feasible. But I think a part of the problem, and this is worldwide with e-government especially, is that we don't really assess the impact that these projects can have. And I think big data will really help us to hone in on that impact assessment. So it's building that culture throughout government, even as part of what we do in digital transformation, and making that really have a strong correlation to success in any initiative that we choose.
Thank you. And I think that's going to be completely possible, as we heard from Mauricio, to use big data in that way. So I think we have to leave it there. I really want to thank the panelists for a great discussion. All of you have made some very interesting contributions and really been very respectful of the time that we had. And so I want to thank you again, and also thank the participants for joining us today. I think that big data has a lot of potential for delivering benefits, not just at the country or community level, but even at the individual level as well. And so this is a very practical exercise in terms of this discussion. So thanks a lot, and hopefully we can continue these discussions at a later date. All the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening.